Hi, dear listeners, and welcome back to Blush and Bloom, the podcast where we talk about women's health, self care, and everything in between. I'm your host, Gigi, founder of Asale, your space for cycle aware and preventive care. I'm really glad you're here with me on this journey to unpack women's health and highlight the incredible things being built in this space. So let's get into today's episode. All right. Hi, Jill. Thank you so much for joining me on the Blush and Bloom podcast. So, for people who are meeting you for the first time, how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here. I'm Jill Miranda. I'm a FemTech advisor and digital health operator. I work in startups and particularly uh, in any technology that's really helping vulnerable populations, in particular women's health. So, really happy to be here and have this chat.
Okay, so where did your drive to work in women's health and health equity originally come from, and why did you found Snatch Health?
Yeah. So, I mean, I will say for me, healthcare has never just been a professional thing. It's been a very personal thing. I have a chronic illness. I'm pretty open about it. I've had it since I was a kid. And so I grew up in health systems. I was that kid that was in the hospital. So the patient experience, I can't really divorce from my professional life because that's how I interact with companies. That's how I understand impact. And that's very much still a part of everything I do. I'm a woman, was also like, did women's health as a graduate, women's studies as a graduate program. All of my research was in women's health. So I've always been in the field. I had been working in digital health for years and just had been irritated at the fact that women's health was just, it seemed like it wasn't ever being talked about in the rooms I was in. And it's because I was in rooms with like VCs that were not taking it seriously or that were too late stage. And it took me years to kind of realize that the vast majority of growth in women's health and femtech and the incredible innovation is at a pre-seed level usually. It's really early stage companies that are struggling big time to fundraise and to stay afloat. And so after years of it felt like not being able to work on the projects I was most passionate about, kind of quit more of the corporate job and the startups that I was at and started like just down the entrepreneurial path as a founder myself and as an advisor and a board member to a lot of different women's health companies. So kind of Snatch Health was created out of that there's just a lack of support for early stage, especially first time female founders. And they make a lot of very costly mistakes at the beginning because they don't know what they're doing. And you can't make much money off of them. So very few consultants actually sell to them because you're not selling. And so we really wanted to find a way to help them and create a business model that works. And so that was kind of the impetus between Snatch Health.
Okay, that's really incredible. And I love that you're sharing the story behind the brand. That's really cool. So the brand itself is playful and gets snatched, and it has like this retro vibe, but your work is also very serious. Like, was that contrast intentional?
Yeah, so I will say that my co-founder is a brilliant brand strategist. And so I'm lucky. That's why our website looks so beautiful. But we were both very, very involved in creating the brand. I tend to love the vintage, and so did she. And we wanted it to be playful. We wanted it to be accessible. We wanted it almost to feel like a direct to consumer brand, right? Like when you're going on the website, it's an experience and you feel safe and interested enough to keep scrolling and to want to learn more. It was supposed to be an accessible, inclusive, fun environment. And definitely in plenty of situations, business gets serious, but we didn't want the brand to be clinical or inaccessible to the average person. And again, keeping in mind that a lot of the founders were working with our first time founders, we wanted it to really speak to that experience and to the experience of a female founder and a women's health person in particular.
So you've worked across pre-seed to enterprise. What do you think early stage femtech founders especially need more support with?
Yeah. So I will say I'm not exactly enterprise. I've worked pre-seed to about Series B. I'm a startup junkie. What was the question? One more time.
Okay, what do you think early stage femtech founders needs the most support with?
Investing at fundraising, essentially. Honestly, again, there's a reason it's what everybody talks about, and it is the number one barrier for women's health and female founders. They need to know how to interact with investors, how to stand out, how to tell a narrative that actually moves people to open up their pockets. They need to learn how to sell something, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's good business. The way to an investor, the way to money is always through their pockets, right? Like you have to speak the language. Saying that like women are dying every day because of this, so we should do this is not a reason for someone to invest. There needs to be a very clear ROI. And I think that's really hard for any mission based founder to kind of do because this is such a personal, serious problem. But you can't talk about it as in this is what we're doing because it's for the greater good, right? You have to talk about it as in this is going to make back your investment tenfold. And if we're talking about venture, then you have to 10x. That's the logic. Now, whether that's actually possible, especially in the market we currently have, is very debatable, but that's essentially what you're selling. And so many founders have incredible products and they come with this beautiful personal story of what called them to do this. They just assume that because it's a huge problem, it'll make money and they don't defend how they're going to get to that money and how they're going to get the investors' money back. They can't prove that ROI. That's a huge problem. The other huge problem beyond just investment is the lack of understanding that the entire world has about the female body. Um, Almost all medical, I believe, and fact check me on this one, but 96% of medical research is all based on the male body, male rats, male humans, and women weren't allowed into clinical trials until 1993. And even when they were allowed in, it was mixed gendered, not only women, right? So we have a very, very, very finite amount of understanding and actual like biological, physiological, clinical understanding of what the human body does. Female mice don't menstruate. They don't have menopause, right? So like the ways that we're studying and getting our information are inherently flawed, or they're not done at all because the same way that female founders can't fundraise, like you can't fund research that nobody gives a shit about. And we don't really have we don't have answers. And you cannot create something if you don't know what the problem is. And if you don't have the research on our bodies and why they're different, then you can't solve that problem. A great example of this is heart disease shows up in men extremely different than it does in women. When I say heart attack, most people, the first thing they think of is like, can't move my right arm, feels like there's an anvil on my chest, right? Women do not experience heart attacks that way. We don't have pain in our left arm. We do not have chest pains. It can come as like gastro issues. It can come as like difficulty, like respiratory difficulty breathing. There are so many different ways. So when a woman goes into an ER and the doctors want to help, but they're looking for the symptoms that peak heart attack and they don't see them, that woman never gets treated for that, right?
Yeah.
And it happens in every possible disease and every possible area you could ever think of is that doctors do not have the information. Nobody does. And so how do we create solutions if we don't even know what problems there truly are and what solutions will actually work?
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really, really insightful. So, what are some red flags you notice in how healthcare startups approach go to market and product validation?
Yeah. I think again, we kind of touched upon it earlier, but go a bit into it. There's a huge difference between TAM, SAM, SOM, right? Like all the acronyms are super annoying, but the amount of times I see a deck where it's like women are 52% of the population. So this is a 40, 50 billion market. And it's like, no, right? No, that doesn't make sense. You have a menstrual tracking app. Not every single woman on the face of the planet can use that, would need to, right? So like, it's like, you can't just say, oh, because there are all of these women, that's how large the market is. And the amount of times that that's what's on a deck, because people want big numbers. And what's far more important than big numbers are defensible numbers. And that's a differentiation that's pretty hard. I will also say, like, a deep and genuine understanding of the customer. The more and more companies I see, the rarer it becomes. Very rarely do people do enough research, enough like market intel, enough analysis, talk to enough people to genuinely understand what the problem is. Most founders come into it with this is the problem, and then they're looking for validation to what they think the problem is, right? So they're talking to people to hear an answer, and once they hear the answer, they're good. There are very few people that are able to be a bit more objective and be like, you know what? I think this is what the answer, but I'm not going to lead. Like, I'm going to ask what what problems they're seeing and let their customers tell them what the problem is rather than vice versa. The people that are able
Mhm.
to go to their customers and be like, you tell me what you need and have a deep understanding of what they need, not what the founder thinks they need, that's been a huge commercialization issue in digital health from the age of time, right? Because all of these like very, very brilliant entrepreneurs come up and they say, you know what? We need XYZ. And clinicians look at that and they're like, fuck off. No, like I don't have time. I barely have time to see patients. I'm staying up nights doing notes. I don't want to use that tool. I don't have the ability. It doesn't fit into my workflow. It doesn't make sense to me. Like our clinic can't afford it. And so all of these products, like if they adjust at first to clinicians, right? Like you would have seen this problem. So I think that's another huge red flag as well.
That was, thank you so much for sharing that. So there is still seeing women's health and queer health treated like niche markets. What's one mindset shift investors need to make?
Yeah. This one I just like there's very little answer for other than like how could half the population be niche? And we've said it over and over until we're blue in the face that it's almost cliche to say that and yet still it's seen as niche. We'll also say like when you're talking about particular populations of color, right? Whenever you're talking about underserved populations, the niche excuse is always going to come up. And I don't think investors actually even believe it at this point. I think it's just the easiest way to say no. And then there are a lot of male investors that do actually think it's niche. And if they still think that in 2025, I feel like there's very little hope for their brains. There's not much else we can do, right? But half the population is not niche. And I think, yeah,
All right. So you've hosted a women's health happy hour during New York Tech Week, and it was loved by the community. What's your secret to creating an awesome community?
yeah, so this is actually like a core. We didn't mean for events to be a core part of what Snatch did. What
Mhm.
actually happened was we went to a conference. It's a yearly conference about women's health, and every single year it gets worse and worse. You slowly see the quality decline. And there's
Mhm.
always a man planning it. Genuinely and truly, it's put on by a large organization. It's always a male planner. There's never been a woman that's planned this event. And we were at the event this past fall and everyone was pissed. Founders, like execs, investors, people felt like they had wasted their time and money. And it was that like animosity and like frustration and exhaustion and like anger that we were like, well, shit, someone needs to do it better, but none of us have the time, right? We're all making businesses, we're selling products, we're like trying so hard and fighting so hard for women's health. Nobody has the time to do events. Can't really make much money off of them, right? They're really expensive. They're unbelievably time consuming. The ROI, and I wrote a LinkedIn post about this, but like the ROI in events is not linear. It's not easily quantifiable. And many would argue the ROI is not there. It's definitely not immediate, right? And so we had just said, look, like there needs to be for us, by us programming, and that's not here. So fuck it, we're going to put it here. And so we made a plan. It was called the Synthesis Event Series, and we were going to go to every major healthcare conference of Q1. So JP Morgan in San Francisco, Vibe in Nashville, and South by Southwest. And we were going to bring women's health programming to those, whether they wanted it or not. And we were going to create events for founders, investors, enterprise partners to come together. The events have ranged from like founder dinners of 20 people to the New York Tech Week events, which actually we had over 800 registrants for the two events that we did. So they range from large to small. What I will say is every time there's an event, people come and they're like, this is one of the only ones. The JPM was an exception. I will say there was like a very large amount of women's health events comparatively this year, which was awesome. We started the year on a high point, but then obviously administration changed and women's health got taken off of the agenda. As quickly as it had been put on, it was there for 30 days and then got taken off again. So there was a genuine need to bring our community together and to create the type of events and also the type of programming that we need. We don't need another panel to talk about how women get 2% of venture funding. We need a panel that talks about like, how do we get around that? What are the actual actionable things that you can do? We need to like raise awareness about the gap in fundraising. We need to get investors in the same room as other investors. We need to
Yeah.
get in the room as founders. Like we need to bring these disparate pieces together. And all of healthcare is very, very siloed, right? That's something that you will hear over and over again. It's very difficult when there's just narrow views of like point solutions, like we're going to solve this one tiny problem for this one tiny part of the population. There's a lack of connective tissue. And in a business sense, it's bad. It leaves a lot of LTV on the ground for founders. And on a macro level, it just makes healthcare more inefficient and worse. And so we had a Vive event that was all about that. Is
Mhm.
about how do we create partnerships that work for early stage startups as well as enterprises? How do we connect the tissue? How do we fix the silos? And so I say that to just say every one of our events was like very carefully planned to address a specific issue that is not being talked about enough or not being talked about well. Or it was to bring people that don't often get to be in the same room in the same room. We had a few companies that actually got investment through our events. It's happened 4 times, which in women's health, like that's a large number for women's health.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah, so the event series did what it was meant to. It was a lot of work, and again, it didn't make us a dime. It was a huge investment on our part, but we felt like it needed. We had high conviction that someone needed to do it, and if not us, then who? Right? That's kind of how it happened. And the series ended with New York Tech Week, and those were the two most well attended events we've had yet. So it was really validating to hear how much people enjoyed that series. Sad that it's over.
that's really impactful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Speaking of impact, what does impact mean to you right now, and has that definition changed over the years?
I think my definition of impact has changed. I think for me, it's who needs access to care the most and who needs access to care and is not getting it and why. And impact is solving for that, right? Like healthcare is and should be viewed as an inalienable human right. Everyone deserves the right to see a doctor. Everyone deserves the right to live a healthy life. And yet it's been politicized and it's been privatized and bastardized, and it's not seen as a human right by the vast majority of people. And so impact for me is goes back to the patient of how are we getting people to access to care that aren't getting care. And you know what, there's a lot of other ways to measure impact, like health systems and Medicaid and all of these other like important structural things that we need to fix, and it is a structural problem that does need to be fixed. But I think impact for me at the end of the day gets boiled down to the most basic. This person can't afford to see a doctor, or there's not a doctor near them, or they really need one, but they can't get access to the right specialist. There's just so many people that need care and can't get it. An example of this, one of the companies that I had founded, it was focused on women with chronic and complex health issues, and we did obviously a beta test and launched it with a few hundred users. And there was a girl, I will never forget this moment. We were talking about the specific we were talking about an autoimmune disease that was fairly rare and like the specific tests, and like people being like, oh, you don't like, it's really not that difficult. Like you just need to see an ENT. And this girl, this girl, she was in her like early 20s, was like, well, um, I the closest hospital to me is 6 hours away. The closest doctor to me is a family physician that won't treat women or gynecology because he doesn't think that that's appropriate. So in order for her to get a pap smear, right? She has to travel 6 hours. Forget about an ENT, right? Like there's no one there. Even if you do have health insurance and you do have the means, the doctor isn't there. And
Mhm.
deserts are getting bigger and bigger and worse and worse. And then with this one disastrous bill that was just passed, obviously, what's going to be hit hard are those areas and rural health systems and areas where the closest hospital is 6 hours away. And you know what? That girl probably isn't going to have a 6 hour away now. That hospital is going to go out of business because they're surviving off of reimbursement from the government. Once that is lost, that girl's now going to be what, 12, 13, 15 hours away from the nearest hospital. And so, how do you get care to that girl, whether it's at home, whether it's like helping to like getting actual insurance, like getting a doctor in proximity? How do you get care to her? Is at the end of the day the best way to measure impact for me. And that's also like the promise of tech, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Why health is so exciting. And I think when I first started in like the early mid 2010s, everybody was saying we're democratizing access, we're democratizing access. And it was such a fancy word. It was such a word that was used. And in theory, it's beautiful and it should be happening. And tech should allow for it, right? Like
Yeah.
we have innovation now that you can get a pap smear at home. You can have an x-ray done from a van. Like there's plenty of ways to bring care to people or see a doctor through telemedicine, right? It
Yeah.
should be making it more accessible. And yet largely because of cost, it's prohibitive for most people still. So like tech has yet to fully live up to its promise of being able to make care accessible to anyone. And we have to hold like the industry accountable and to keep trying to make it better.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really insightful. It's pretty much left me speechless. So, okay. So, if we gave you a billboard in Times Square, what's the one message you put up about women's health?
Women's health is human health. The amount of people I have, founders being like, we need to stop calling it women's health, like it's polarizing. It's very frustrating, right? Because if we say human health, we've been saying human health and not gendering it for the history of time. And look at where it's gotten us. When you say human health, it's male health, right? That's who you study on. That's who you make the drug for. Look at if you don't believe, look at reimbursement rates. For that's one of the biggest problems we have in women's health right now is the disastrous situation of reimbursement. Most of our care is fee for service. That means that doctors are only getting paid and health systems and offices are only getting revenue through reimbursement. And the reimbursement rates for doing the same exact procedure on a woman as opposed to a man can be as much as 60, 70% less reimbursed. So you can do neurosurgery on a man and a woman, and just because it's a woman you're going to get half of what you would get, and I'm just throwing those numbers out, and then forget about it if it's like gynecological or anything having to do with the uterus, doesn't matter, right?
Mhm.
The amount of drugs that we have for erectile dysfunction and yet very few for female pleasure. I'm working, one of my portfolio companies is a consumer company that's focused on female arousal. It's infuriating because every single drug that exists is not created for women because our arousal doesn't fucking matter. Right. So I think it's really tempting to just say we have to stop gendering it. Like when you say women's health, people don't care. But yeah, until we have parity, until we have research on female bodies, until we have doctors that actually know how to take care of us, until we have
Mhm.
reimbursement rates that are commiserate to male reimbursement rates, we have to call it women's health because when we called it health, people didn't give a shit about women. But women's health care is health care, right? Like when so many diseases are disproportionate, women take on the somatic load of like universes of men, right? Just the shit that you have to go through living in the world with a vagina or as identified woman is intense. And no surprise, that means that our health for almost everything, our rates are worse, right? Like 2 out of 3 Alzheimer's cases are women. Like dementia affects more women than it does men. Anything autoimmune, if you're a woman, you have a much larger rate of having those autoimmune disease, a lot of which are very rare and unstudied, particularly because mostly women have them. Over 75% of women would identify as ill, chronically ill, sick. And that's probably an underestimated number, right?
Mm.
So I have to check myself on that figure just to make sure that it hasn't moved much. Women are sick at disproportionate rates, and yet we can't get care. We can't get reimbursed for the care that we need. Women's health care is seen as women's health care, not health care. We do have to say women's health. We do have to name it. We do have to gender it, but that doesn't change the fact that women's health care is health care, period, end of story. And it needs to be viewed as such, not because you have a mom or you have a daughter, but because it's a human being, right?
Mhm. Right. Okay. Thank you. So, let's say we have a female FemTech founder and she's burnt out and doubting everything. What's your pep talk for her?
A girl sleep, man. It's really tough. I will say after a year of being a founder, it had gotten to the point where I was having about a seizure a week. Towards the end of it, really. It was being a founder is a stress unlike anyone can understand unless you've been through it. The
Mhm.
load it takes on your brain, on your nervous system, on your heart, on every part of your body, brain, and soul. I- it can't be put into words, right? And so taking care of like self-care, I feel again is like a bit bastardized, but keeping into account that you can't help anyone if you're dead, and the intensity of stress that we're under is shaving years off of our life. You got to take time for yourself. And I feel like female founders, in a way that male founders don't, feel like it's all on us. Like if we don't bring this, this is not going to happen. And to an extent, like there's truth to that, but we still need to survive. We need to take care of ourselves, and we need to find communities in which they offer us the help and support and love in which we can do that and kind of speak about that and name that. And the other, I feel like a lot of female founders don't really talk about the toll that it takes on you. And that needs to be a conversation that we have publicly more often. It affects everything: appetite, weight, sex drive, everything about your life changes as a founder due to the stress. And we need to have more honest conversations about what that looks like so women don't feel as alone. My first year as a founder, my sex drive went from like 100 to 0 almost automatically after a few months. And I was having a conversation with another female founder, and she was like, yeah, that was the worst part of my founder journey. Like I got that piece of myself kind of taken away. And we don't have that conversation. Right. So we need to create more spaces where we can, and where it's less stigmatized. And we need to figure out ways to help each other along and really support each other.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. I had no idea myself. Okay. So we are headed towards the end of the podcast. So I have 3 more questions left for you. So what's something you've learned recently that changed how you approach your own work?
I've been really challenging myself to try and integrate AI into my workflow more often. I work in tech, but I am not always the best with technology. I am the person who like has not updated their iPhone in goodness knows how long because I'm afraid it'll change my home screen, right? But you got to get used to it or get left behind. So I've been trying really hard to find AI tools and ways in which to learn how it's best used, how to use it correctly, and how to have it make your life easier. And I think there's huge opportunity again as female founders in that. But we need to like take the time to learn how to use it and also how to use it responsibly. So I think that's my big takeaway. Although
Right.
talking about AI, so I don't know if that even fucking counts.
I mean, it does count. Like AI is pretty helpful. And like you said already, using it ethically is also very important. All right. So final 2 questions. The one is, what would you tell 15?
I'd like to say it gets better, but I don't know if I could tell my 15-year-old self that honestly right now.
Wouldn't she be
Don't be
so
afraid.
proud?
Don't be afraid of who you are. You might be a lot, you're passionate, and it might not feel like you professionally fit in that carbon copy corporate box. You say what you mean and you are honest, brutally so. And that's not something to hide, that's like a strength. And it took me years in my professional career to realize that being blunt, being honest, speaking up when someone disrespects me, saying something, addressing it immediately, particularly working in the space that I do, it's a strength and people respect you more and it makes your life a lot easier. Trying to make yourself smaller doesn't really help anyone. And I wish I hadn't spent so many years trying to do that.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right. So for our listeners who want to connect with you, where's the best place to find you?
LinkedIn. I am extremely, extremely active on LinkedIn. I try and post content as often as I can. Shoot me a message on there. And yeah, would love to connect with you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jillian. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast and learning so much about what, as a FemTech founder, I'm supposed to know because I gathered a lot from this conversation. Thank you so much.
I'm glad. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
All right. Hi again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Blush and Bloom. I'm so glad you joined me for this conversation. If you found it helpful, please share this episode with a friend or someone who might need it. Let's keep talking about women's health and working towards better outcomes for all of us. You can find more episodes and resources at www.asale.tech and check out our app at www.asale.health. And you can follow us for more updates on Instagram at asale.tech. Until next time, I'll see you in the next episode. Take care and bye-bye.